Hi, you're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore.
Hey, welcome to Boggy Talk. Hope you are doing well. Talk. Boggy Talk. Sorry, I just started puberty. Voice is cracking. Also because I'm really tired.
Someone needs to go through the history of Boggy Talk and pay attention every time I'm critiquing your voice.
Because it's, well, a lot of times
they'll be like, really?
restart.
You want us to start with you, James? We listened to you for 40 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about your voice. Let's talk about your voice.
Thanks for not doing that,
Hey,
Justin.
you know, that's why we're friends and co-laborers for the gospel.
I'm glad there wasn't like some salty criticism that you buried in that just came out right then too, because your heart isn't that.
I'm way too tired to remember.
You know how
any
like
of
when
it.
you like say come in there and like, oh, you want to talk about that? Well, let's talk about this. I'm like, dang, bro, you've been
like
holding
your
on
children,
to that.
like your children do. Like, oh, you want to talk about that? Well, you do this. I'm like, we're not talking about me right now, son.
I know.
And
They'll
you're
be
right.
like, well, take the plank out of your eye before you take the speck. I'm like, yeah, I don't think that quite applies like that to parents.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not our topic today.
Yeah, and we, we may ramble a little bit on this one. Not that we ever do that ever, but we just got back from Richmond, Virginia.
Yes,
literally this morning.
Like
we're
15
recording
minutes
this.
ago.
Yes, and because we were there for the Jeffersons and their commissioning with the International Mission Board, and it was an incredible time. We're going to talk about that a little bit more next week.
You know who they are because you watch Boggy Talk every week
right.
or listen to it every week, and you heard them.
That's right. You did hear from them for 2 weeks. If you didn't catch those, I would say go back and listen to them. One, they share their calling for the nations. Two, they talk about just evangelism, personal evangelism, and both of them are great. So go back just a couple of weeks and you'll catch those. But today on Boggy Talk, we are following up on this past Sunday.
Which is this upcoming Sunday for us.
That's right. Yeah. Because we are pre-recording,
Yes,
but we're
we
talking about our series Now I See, and we got into chapter 5, and we really focusing on these two verses from the passage we talked about in Ephesians chapter 5, but verses 3 and 4.
Hey, first of all, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay. I'm just like diving in. Like, let's
I know
go.
you did.
I'm doing great.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, I guess you covered you were great because you went to the
I mean that's
night.
just perspective giving.
Okay.
You're like, how could I complain today? Because I mean,
and
tomorrow
your
is a different
Braves
story.
beat the Cubs in heartbreaking fashion.
Two nights in a row. That was pretty
I'm a
amazing.
Cubs fan,
and I'm a Braves fan. And the first game they won, it was because the outfielder just totally dropped the ball, and he literally dropped the ball. And we were laughing about it because I was saying, like if that was like a high school team, or you're like, oh, poor guy, like, but you're like, you should have caught that. I don't feel bad for you, like that kind of callousness of heart. And then last night it was just Acuna. He just did it. So
he did it.
How are you?
I'm good, man.
Oh, okay.
I'm not happy about the Cubs losing. But
because they're fighting for the wild card. So
I got a lot going on, so I'm feeling a little busy. Yeah, and I'm also extra tired because of the flight.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of just makes everything feel exactly.
Hopefully, I'll sleep well tonight.
Yes, I agree.
Kids, don't get in the way of my sleep tonight,
or else.
Christy, don't have a lot to talk about tonight.
Oh no!
So this is past tense. So I'll update you guys.
That's right. Yeah, we'll be sure to update you next week. So
back to the scripture.
So Ephesians chapter 5, 3 and 4. But sexual immorality and impurity or greed should not even be heard among you, as is proper for the saints. And coarse and foolish talking or crude joking are not suitable, but rather giving thanks. So
what scripture? What translation?
This was I just grabbed the Bible that was
New
over
World?
here. No, this is
Holman Christian.
Holman
Standard.
Christian.
They don't even make that anymore.
Yeah, they don't. Now it's just the CSB.
Christian Standard.
Now it's not
Holman
Holman.
got left out.
That's right. They're like, I don't know. I don't know the history of that. Why Holman didn't get
coming to a Boggy Talk near you.
That's right. Well, we'll dive in. We'll dive into that.
We should do a Bible translations.
Yeah, we should. That's a good one.
Before.
We have. We've talked about it before.
They forgot. Okay.
So, why are we talking about this? Well, the Bible talks about it.
That's right.
Question though, did anybody? So the 2 weeks before this week, we did like in the welcome video said, "Hey, just FYI, if you've got kids, that we're going to be talking about some mature topics." Did anybody come to you and like, "What are you going to talk about?"
No.
Okay.
I don't surprise people anymore.
Yeah, they're like, whatever.
We probably should. We should probably cover our earmuffs.
That's right. So why are we talking about this, brother?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We're a little loopy.
So the point from those two verses specifically was to flee sexual immorality, and then I got into the funny thing about Well, actually, there's several things for those 2 verses, but the thing we're talking about today is flee sexual immorality, and this isn't the only place in Scripture. I didn't really get into that, but I think I alluded to it. Like there's several other places that this is referenced in Scripture, and I think and I think this is what we're talking about today. We live in a culture that has really become just so accepting of sexual immorality,
Right.
and I don't even know that we're fully aware how accepting we are of it. And I think as Christians, part of the reason that we're as accepting of it as we are is because we're kind of overreacting to how the church kind of treated certain sexual sins for a long period of time, while then having their own issues. Like was maybe made it political versus making it biblical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, I grew up in church as a teen, and there was a huge emphasis on true love waits and purity culture. And now there's
anti-purity.
Yeah, and basically there's a backlash against that. It's kind of like one of those that was there were just, I would say, things that were sexuality was. And second, it was overemphasized, and it was like elevated above other spiritual things. And it's so simultaneously in many churches, you had this purity emphasis on purity culture, but then it led to a shaming, and then also there was also rampant abuse. I would say rampant, but there was abuse going on in some of these same places, and so it's become one of those situations now. There's a push to kind of like abandon all talk of purity, rather than like what does the Bible actually say and what's the heart behind it. And then going back to what you said, I think we truly are desensitized to this as a culture because it is so pervasive. And there's a part of us that's just like, well, that's just the way it is. And so we really have to push against that biblically, and, in our hearts to do what Scripture say, to flee sexual immorality.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the only 2 things that it says flee from it. Usually like what God is telling us is to stand firm, like do our battles against whatever attack, but actually we're told to flee sexual immorality. So that's the power it has. And I referenced this on Sunday. A lot of times people are like, well, all sins are equal. And it's like, they are in the sense that they make you unrighteous.
Right.
But they are not equal in the sense of their consequences, nor how they should be dealt with, if you would say that. And the Bible specifically says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 that we sin against our own body when we commit sexual sins.
Right.
And so the consequences of sexual sin are stronger than other sins. And we are fooling ourselves if we don't think so. So there should be a great severity and urgency of believers about sexual sin. And so I think it's very fair to say that, like, so, it's funny, on the way here, I was like, I want to watch a movie on our first flight, and I was like, oh, National Lampoons, because the first vacation, I've actually never seen it all the way through. And I was like, and I'm scared to watch some of these because there's like a teenager sitting next to me, what would be on there. And I know a lot of like older, strong, very faithful, godly people who love National Lampoons. And I'm watching and there's nudity. I'm like, oh gosh, I have to forward through it. And I'm like, so like that was the 80s, right? So you have the 80s who are like all these believers that are like strong. We care about purity and we care about these things. And then that's one of their favorite movies. You know what I mean? So like
there's an incongruity.
There is like this, I don't want to say hypocrisy, but this inconsistency in application of sexual immorality. So I get the critique. However, strong Bible-believing, God-fearing people would still be very serious about sexual immorality because of the consequences for you. Like, and maybe the tone and rhetoric would just be different. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely, because I think we were saying like, yes, all sin separates us from God. Like, but the consequences, and the consequence of all sin is death. Yeah. But there are consequences, that's the horizontal, between us and God. Yeah. But there are differing consequences in the
vertical.
Did I say vertical? Yeah, in the vertical, and then the horizontal. There's differing consequences. Right. There just are, and I think another reason, this is so sexual immorality is so damaging, is because, like what you said, like it is sin against our own body, and it's then becomes baggage we bring into relationships
Yeah.
that, and and there is, we're not going to forsake the grace of God, his restoration and all those things that are possible, but it is something that has to be worked through.
Yeah.
And I think particularly with sexual immorality, there is so much shame attached to it, and that we also have to talk through, and we can talk about that in a little bit as far as like how we approach that with children specifically and raising teens and in this culture.
Yeah, you're right. And I think so that I think that's where we should camp out for the rest of our time on this topic. So we are not. So one solution would be like Amish world. And honestly, I mean,
there's times when you're like, hey, maybe.
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, there are
absolutely.
some things that I would question about that culture, but if our culture was all like that, I don't think it's all bad. But that is not our reality, right? Like that's not the reality we live in. If you want to be in the world and not of the world, you're going to be around all kinds of stuff. So how do we be about sexual morality without being a prude? And so let's just walk through some topics, here. So one, it's interesting is I feel like, and I've heard people talk about this, men and women, talk about this, like pastors used to talk about modesty, and now it's almost like you can't talk about modesty without being viewed as a problem. What you're saying is a problem. You know what I mean? And like now, like it seems like the answer is like there was a day when godly women really did care. Like I don't want to cause a man to stumble, and now it feels like the narrative, not from everybody, but a lot is like, well, he shouldn't stumble.
Yeah, and
I'm like, okay, I feel like we've gone way too far, like in immodesty amongst believing. Again, non-believers. They need Jesus. Like that's not the issue. I'm not trying to get non-believers to do any of this, but believers, it just feels like there is like no modesty anymore.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that, like the brother-sister relationship that we're called to have as believers. Like brothers are to care for their sisters, and sisters are to care for their brothers. And I, we've talked about this in our own home with raising a daughter who's in middle school, and you just there are things you think in theory, and then you're like, oh, now I have a child who like. People dress, and she wants to dress when we have different ideas of what is right or what is modest, and wrestling with that. Like, yes, like I say, baby, like you're not responsible for their their thought. Like, however, you are responsible in that. These are your brothers, and like we don't, and it needs to be vice versa. We do need to address that.
Absolutely.
And it goes the other way. And I think for so long, the conversation was always women don't cause your brother to stumble, and it should be the conversation never. I should say never. Rarely went the other way. It needs to be a both
at least
way
publicly. I do remember when I started going to church, like guys were talking about don't look twice. They were saying those things, but it was like the public narrative was always like women, you need to stop.
It needs to be that both way conversation in this, and that's regardless of age, so that's not just parenting teenagers, that's adults too. Like we should be, like we should just be caring and and wise and considering others before ourselves.
Right. Yeah, and I would say I think with that, I think having a sisterhood and having a brotherhood is very important because the accountability needs to really come from the same sex, I'm not going to go to women in our church and be like, hey, you're dressed immodest. This is what, like, it's just not appropriate. Like, it's not going to be received well. It's not appropriate. But, I would have with my daughter, and I guess, if we had really close family members, but that really needs to be like women telling each other like, hey, and I would just say like, I'm not going to get into specifics here, but like, you really do need to ask yourself, like, am I being a servant to others by the way I dress? Because as a Christian, we're called to be a servant to others in every action.
Right. So. Absolutely. And I think a piece of this too comes back to, when we talked about the Amish and how like, there's the avoidance of things of culture and things of the world, and I think we also, when we talk about sexuality, when we talk about sexual sin, we have to be very clear that we could literally do everything possible to protect ourselves and never address the heart of the matter.
You're right,
and so it does like it is a both and. So
it is a both and. Yes.
You do have to address the heart, but I mean, Jesus says like if your eye causes you to stumble, cut it, get rid of it. Like, and I think it's like, that's how serious
Be careful what body part you blame for your sin.
That's right. Yes, exactly. But it's like, you have to be so serious about it at the same time. Like protecting yourself and accountability, or having a program on your phone or computer, those are great tools. They don't, and they can modify behaviors, and that's good. But ultimately, the heart has to be transformed too. And sometimes you need the behavior modification so you have the space for the heart transformation to happen. I'm not saying like these are simultaneous things that need to happen. And I think because so much can so easily focus on the external. And I think experience in the church is like a lot of dudes, particularly, will get together for accountability, and they're like, what happens in accountability is like, oh yeah, well, I struggle with that too, or I struggle with that too. And there's never like, but we shouldn't, so how are we going to help each other? It's just a commiseration, and we need to push each other into the, okay, so how are you progressing in this? How are you becoming like Christ? And challenge each other in love, not out of, hate. Like it's encouraging each other in this.
All right, so 2 other quick topics on that. Content. So we talked about dress content.
Yeah.
How do you not be a prude, but I mean, because it's all out there.
Yeah, that's tough, I think, in the culture, because like you said with National Lampoons, it's like you don't always know what's going to be on something if you choose to watch it. So we try to screen things, try to read like, hey, what's going to be in this before we watch something we're unfamiliar with. Whether we are really
you guys
guarded.
Have that thing on your Vox where like they're talking, they're like, you stupid sinner. Do you have that thing?
No,
I know people in this church
people who
that do
use
have
it,
that.
and I think it's great. We don't. I just think it's wise to screen things. I think it's very wise. Like if you're going to err, like especially with kids, but also adults. Many adults are way too unguarded on this because they think I'm an adult and I can just watch what I want to watch, and it affects you. It does
not allow your freedom to become an opportunity for the flesh.
Exactly,
and it does affect you.
Like it really does. And so, I don't want to give legalistic like you should watch this instead of this. Watch this, like. But at the same time, like we are called to a high standard as believers in this.
Instead of Grey's Anatomy, watch Grace Anatomy.
Man, there probably is a Christian version of that. But I think just being so mindful of that, our kids would say we're overprotective in this, and I'm like, yep, I am, and there's a reason why, because, and you had the conversation, well, you watched a movie with guns or violence, and I'm like, yeah, and that doesn't stick in my mind. Like that's not, but this will, we've had those conversations with all of our kids, and it's like,
you're like Charlton Heston had a gun, man. And Moses had a gun. Of course I am.
So you just have to have those conversations and explain and be like, at the end of the day, like, God's entrusted my kids to me, and Christy and I have to make those decisions. At the same time, I have to hold myself to those same standards, and I should, out of stewardship to first my relationship with the Lord, and then to my wife, and then to all the people around me too. And I think the less you consume, the more you're like, I don't even want that. Because that's God changes your taste, not that it's not ever a struggle for me or you or anyone else, but he does transform us.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. And I mean, I would say that it affects you. And if you don't think it affects you, you're crazy. You're deceiving yourself and you're heading towards destruction. And so I do think like you just need to really watch the amount of content that you're, consuming that's negative. You need to ask yourself, like, am I trying to, because stuff is on TV today, I mean, like, for real. And I mean, we had movies we watched that you would watch like TBS, and they would like cover somebody with a grape, like a grape orchard or something, but now it's just like
it's there, and it's like, it's just part of it. It's art.
But I would ask, like, are you like trying to see that, like that is different. Like, and that would be the thing back to the original content with guys, like, like, are you looking like for that,
the
or
opportunity?
Is that why you see it, because you're looking for it, or is it because you see it and you're like, man, this bothers me, I wish it wouldn't be this way. All right, last one, because I know this really stings. I talk about being funny and not sinning.
Oh,
and coarse joking and all that stuff. So I didn't talk about this on Sunday, But what about that's what she said?
Oh,
jokes?
the office joke. Yeah.
That's what she said. Because you know what that means, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. No, why don't you explain?
Okay. I will if you want. This is Boggy Talk.
Yeah. I mean, if you have not, the joke, it comes from the office. I mean, that's what popular.
Don't Google it, but yeah.
I mean, so man, that's one that
I'm stepping on toes right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
My own.
I've made that joke.
So can I answer?
Confession.
I actually used to say that like all the time. And because of this, and part of it, I have kids, and is I really just don't, I mean, I'm not saying the old James doesn't, show up every once in a while, but I mean, really, I'm like, I don't want to put things in people's heads, and I don't know if that's because I'm a pastor or just because I'm a believer in Christ. I think it's just because I'm a believer in Christ, but I definitely think like, beyond that, so I don't know where the line is, but I think if you cross that, you're, in terms of sexual joking, you are going too far. You definitely should not be joking about like people,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a wise standard. I think probably if I were to say like I've made that joke before, and it's just because I'm like, it's actually not really funny. Like, I mean, because of what it means, and you're like you said, you're putting thoughts in your mind and other people's minds. And I think what exposed it to me was having kids. And I'm like, they don't need to be going around saying this. So why would I? So maybe that was not the right motivation, but I'll just think, but if somebody makes the joke, I'm not like, you shouldn't do that. I'm like, that's not like.
They're just being funny. And, I don't know that they're sinning. The point is be funny and do not sin. So you just have to keep. I think the point of everything that we're trying to say, and I was saying on Sunday, is like, be aware of the serious issue here and don't let your guard down. Like, you need to just you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself, and others.
Yeah. And there's like, there's times like you'll be in a conversation with somebody or a group of friends and somebody will say something and you all crack up and you're like, okay, that's
we know why we're laughing.
But from there, where do you keep it up? Like, or do you continue that? Do you say, all right, like move on? Like those are the kinds of questions that are heart revealing questions in this. So I would just say again, and we've talked about this before, with Alec was on, we talked about technology and stuff like that. But I think particularly mentioned like, just shame that comes along with this, that it's important as you're having this conversation, if you're parenting kids or older kids and adults, like, like peer-to-peer, friends, the shame that's attached to this, like I told my kids, I said, I want you to know this as your dad, like, I don't want this for you, but if you ever, if you ever struggle, just come talk to me and I promise you that there's no consequence. Like I will help you, whatever it takes. If it means like we decide, hey, what's best for you is that we, I just want to develop that, them being able, because I think there's so much shame attached that many people know they need help or they need accountability, but we don't want to bring that up. And because it's humbling and there's shame attached. So we have to, Jesus bore our shame on the cross. And so that's not license to sin, but that is, there's freedom because there's forgiveness.
If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who gives generously to all without finding fault. And so, if we're trying to help people, we're remembering that if they're coming asking for wisdom on how to deal with something, that God sees believers and gives them wisdom and doesn't see fault in them because of the cross of Jesus Christ. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, this goes into the music this isn't just what we watch. This is what we listen to. It's just,
you're just setting up the question.
I know. I was actually just thinking we got questions and this actually sets one of them up. And I think, so we are going to move into questions. And before the question is, because James has referenced his love for 90s rap and hip hop. So I want to say this first. There's a lot of Christians, predominantly white Christians, who would say, oh, that music is just so bad because, and the same thing applies to their country and pop, whatever they listen to. It's just because it's in a more preferable tone.
We keep it real in the hood.
So let's just throw that out there.
I've actually lived in the hood before. You haven't. So,
there you go. Anyway. Well, so what are your favorite 90s? Your favorite 90s rap?
Early 90s, early 2000s.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say one of the people said, do we need to have a conversation with our pastor about whether that's for the edification of the body? I'm like, yeah, you do. Yeah, good point. Point taken. Yeah, and just so you know, I'm not like, every day sitting listening. I grew up with it.
Yeah. So you
even though my parents didn't really like me listening to it, not for Christian reasons, just kind of what you were just alluding to. So because of that, it's a familiarity. So yeah, Jay-Z, which, you know, I would not listen to with my children, and you know, Dr. Dre, which I would not listen to with my children. My kids actually have the edited version of the next episode on their iTunes, and it's like says 4 words, like the whole song. Seriously.
Hey,
Yeah. So yeah. And I liked Eminem. I liked Kanye West. I liked, Biggie was probably my favorite. And his, no, that's not true. One of the songs starts out right there, man. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. Hey, there you
It's
go.
not
So
great.
now you know.
But I also love Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
And he says the same things, just not explicitly.
Exactly. It's yes, absolutely.
The best is yet to come. What, you know, if listen to the song, you know what he's talking
Yeah,
about. So.
exactly. So it just sounds classier.
So-
it's a certain audiences.
Yeah,
So.
and it's just ingrained, you know. And again, I would say that, you know, with music, this is one of those things where some people can just listen to the music for real, and it doesn't affect them. It's just the beat. They're not. I would just say it does affect you. So don't think it doesn't completely affect you. And secondly, also be very aware of the brothers and sisters who are around you and the content you're consuming. Obviously, there are things that are crossing the line for you individually to do, whether it comes to alcohol or what you're watching on TV or what you listen to. But there are also things that like you need to be mindful of others. So
absolutely.
how about another question that makes me seem very spiritual?
All
Since
right,
that made me sound not spiritual.
This is follow up to a few weeks ago. You referenced this when we talked about the mission work, your trip to South Asia. What is the story about getting arrested in China?
Thank you. Yeah,
All
the
right.
90s hip hop martyr for Jesus
There you
Christ.
go.
Even though I didn't die, so I'm not a martyr. So when I was surrendered to the call of ministry, was just kind of preparing for Bible college, I used that opportunity in between leaving my job and moving to Bible college to go to the mission field for 3 weeks. I went to China, and we were specifically tasked to follow up with a group who had mapped villages and a hike. So we were backpacking it's kind of rural. People that never heard the name of Jesus, China, Southwest China. And we were, if we could engage in conversation, but none of us spoke English. I mean, none of us spoke we all spoke English.
Yeah, so you didn't.
None of
English.
us spoke the dialect that was
Right.
there. And we didn't encounter very many people who spoke English. So we would distribute religious propaganda is what the Chinese government said
would
we were
call it.
doing.
Yep.
And so when we were doing that, I guess someone in one of these villages were like, hey, there's these 4 white people walking around in the villages distributing religious propaganda. And we got arrested. I remember we had set up to camp for the night, and here comes this mob of people over this little hill. And one of them could speak broken English, who was a police officer, and was like, hey, have you guys been distributing these? And we're like, yeah. I mean, we had like backpacks full of them.
Yeah. What's in your bag? I'm not going to open it.
They took us, it was a long way because we were kind of pretty remote, took us into the nearest town. We stayed in what was like a customs holding cell. They actually didn't lock our door because the restroom was like a shared restroom for the whole place, like in the courtyard, so we could walk there. So I actually remember walking in the middle of the night to use the restroom. And then they like videoed us, and then that next day they interrogated each of us individually, and they told us we had 7 days to leave the country. And if we ever did anything like this again, we'd be in jail for a year. And so we got out.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I would just say it was cool. The coolest thing. So we told them, like that morning, I was like, okay, guys, I knew one guy, I didn't know the other 2 guys. And I was like, hey, remember when Abraham lied? That did not go well.
Right.
So let's just tell them the truth. Let's tell them we came here because we love Jesus and we love we love Chinese people. And so we all told them that. But what was really cool is one of the dudes. So when they took us into town in it was like little police SUVs, they put 3 of us in one with 2 people, and they put the other guy by himself with 4 of them.
Wow.
And he said they put in the CD, and they were listening to the CD, and they pulled over on the side of the road because he got there later than us, and we're like, do you believe this?
Yeah. Wow.
Like, do you believe this man walked on water and he fed 5,000 people? And he was like, he saved my life, so he could do any of that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we will never know this side of heaven.
That's so cool.
Did God send us there just for that?
Just for that opportunity. Yeah, he could.
Anyway, I mean, there's more to the story, but
it's amazing. It's amazing. And so, I think what we need to remember and understand is that there are people, like believers in countries all over who share the gospel with their families, with their neighbors, at risk for their lives.
Yes.
And there are those who are called to go to the nations. Yes. We're all called to be a part of going to the nations, but there are those who are called to move, like the Jeffersons. And why are we calling them the Jeffersons? Not because of situations like this. There are countries where it can be dangerous for them to be known what they're doing, or it blows the cover. And so we do. I mean, the same thing happened to friends of mine that I served with in Korea. They moved to China to reach people there, and they served very faithfully there. They had a volunteer team come in, spend some time with them, and they were doing the same thing. You would go out at night and distribute literature. Well, they had taken some pictures inside this family's apartment. It was a husband and wife, and they had two middle school aged sons at the time. And one of the volunteer, lost the SD card somehow. Well, it was discovered. They bring it in, and the volunteer team told our friends, hey, we lost this card, so just be mindful. And our friend then later the next day, and fast forward a couple of days, goes to the post office and sees his picture up, and it says wanted for being a missionary. And he called his wife. He said, I'll meet you in Korea, and I'm going to the airport right now. I need to get the kids. We're leaving. And so it's serious when we talk about this kind of stuff with security and missions. So
the IMB's gotten better than sending 4 random college students to distribute religious.
So
exactly. They've come a long way since then. That was not we met in a hotel with this guy who went by the name Mufasa. Seriously, I'm not even joking. Who debriefed us just because how underground it all was.
Yep.
That still happens, but they just wouldn't send 4 20
without
21
some kind of training
that.
experience. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway. All right. Well, transitioning, since we were in the Atlanta airport today.
Just a few hours ago.
And it's near and dear to your heart because you grew up around
in the ATL.
You grew up riding the train and going to
went
get
to the airport all the time. My dad was...
Remember O'Charlie's?
We didn't
that's O'Reilly.
No, that's
Charlie's.
Right. Charlie's is the rolls. They're the good rolls.
Yeah, and they just had Phillies and stuff. They were in all the airports back in the day. I don't even think they're around anymore.
I'm thinking O'Reilly's Auto Parts.
Charlie, what happened to you? So anyway, we were there. So I'm going to ask you some questions about
the Atlanta Airport.
The Atlanta Airport.
Busiest airport in the world.
It is the busiest airport in the world since what year?
1992.
Since 1992, no, actually officially since 1998.
Oh, okay. Well,
but
right decade.
But it has been considered the busiest airport since the 1940s.
Oh, wow, that's early.
Yeah.
But it wasn't very big then.
But it wasn't officially. They just said they were.
Oh, they just said. Yeah, that's kind of like people from Georgia do that.
I know, y'all do.
We just
okay. How many passengers on average go through the Atlanta airport every day?
That's a great question. 150,000.
Double that.
What? 300,000. That's so many people.
Day.
My goodness.
So how many do you think go on average through all the Disney parks a day?
30.
Through Magic Kingdom. Sorry.
Magic Kingdom, 20,000.
Actually, it's about 50 to 60,000.
Really?
Yeah.
My goodness.
But 5 times that goes through the Atlanta airport.
That's crazy. So, that's crazy. Man, that's a lot of people in Disney. That's why it's so crowded.
I was telling you, flying always makes me feel like, wow, this world's really big.
Yeah.
Because this many people are flying.
Because
I'm so insignificant. I feel like, ooh, I'm on a trip. I'm significant.
There's a lot of people here in this church who fly a lot, and they're just like, yeah, you fly. And now we've flown often, but still not often enough to it's still oh, I'm flying. It's kind of fun. And they're just like, yeah, it's Monday.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. And I mean, when you take an international trip, there's just so many people in the world and all that,
yes.
So, okay. Anyway, but did you know that there's another airport that has more total flights?
Chicago O'Hare.
Wow, how'd you know that?
Because in Atlanta they talked about the airport a lot.
So Chicago wins.
That's right. You win. You don't win baseball, but you win airports.
What was on the grounds of the Atlanta airport before it was the Atlanta airport?
Ooh, dump. Junkyard.
No, it was a speedway.
That's right. I forgot that. Yeah, and they moved Atlanta Motor Speedway to Hampton, Georgia, which is just a few miles from where I grew up.
Yeah, and the dude who started Coke, he was the one who had built the subway.
Ah,
yeah, not the subway, the speedway. Sorry.
Interesting. Makes sense.
Okay, Atlanta does not have the tallest air traffic control tower in the world. It has the what ranking?
It doesn't have. It has the 7th. I don't know. Third. Okay.
That was a boring question.
That was a boring question. Oh,
how
who
many
measures
square
those?
foot is the dog park
Oh.
at the Atlanta
You know,
airport?
I noticed when we flew into VPS, there's a dog park outside
there
the park.
really?
There was a little. Basically, it was a fence with a bench with dog paws on the bench, and I was like,
It's
okay.
the service dog thing.
Yeah.
And we're never talking about that on Boggy Talk.
How big? How many?
1,000 square feet. I'm helping you.
I didn't even know there
Okay,
was
this
one. So.
is fun.
Okay.
The first international flight
Ooh.
from Atlanta was to blank and blank, 2 different places.
Okay, so are they counting like Latin America? I'm gonna guess because if it's a big deal, then
So
it's gonna
hold
be
on,
like
let me-
London and Paris.
Let me explain what international means
I mean,
to
you know, I know,
if
but
it's not in
Wait a
our
minute.
nation.
I just, sometimes when you're talking about the Americas, like for now,
I said international. I didn't say non-American
well, but
flight.
now to my credit,
trying to
now
help you here.
to my credit, they
to
like
help
now when you go international, they don't count Mexico. Mexico has its own rules. Like you don't get the same luggage. So I'm going to say Mexico and Canada.
Mexico and Montego Bay, Jamaica.
Oh, that makes
man.
sense.
Yeah, man.
That's
You
not
think about
far.
it because people like coming down
Yeah.
to go down south.
Yeah, makes sense.
All that. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Montego, baby, why don't we go? It's
Okay.
Kokomo. Some old school Beach Boys. Actually, that was like new school Beach Boys. But.
Who were Hartsfield and Jackson?
And Jackson was a mayor of Atlanta because they renamed. It used to just be Hartsfield International,
Okay.
and then that was like fairly recently.
Yeah.
Hartsfield, I'm gonna guess, was another mayor.
Yes, you're right.
All right.
Wow, I'm so impressed. with
I
that.
know a little bit of Georgia
Yeah.
history. Yeah, I remember it was Andrew Jackson, right? He was the
Okay.
mayor of Atlanta when I was a kid, I think, and then they renamed it.
How many Starbucks are there in the Atlanta airport? This is an important
6.
question. Yes.
That was a kind of a random guess, but I was
no,
like,
I
was like, there's 5 terminals plus the international, so I was like, there's probably 1 per,
Okay, yeah, good job. I'm impressed. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, just because
Okay.
I don't think this is actually as interesting as I thought. What
It's a nice try.
number of people are employed
Ooh,
by the Atlanta airport?
by the airport or all the?
Yeah, all like because of the airport. Yeah,
I'm gonna
Sorry.
guess, and that's a lot. At least 10,000.
More,
Really? Okay, 15,000.
more.
20?
More.
25, 30,
More.
35, 40. I feel like I'm on the Price is Right.
Yeah.
Higher. 30,000?
Keep going.
35,
going.
50,
Keep going.
100.
No,
Okay, 70. Lower.
63,000 people.
That's so many people. That's incredible. I mean,
Isn't
when
it
you think about it, I
incredible?
mean, it's open 24/7.
Yeah.
And then, and you got
More people work at the
security
Atlanta
tickets.
airport
Ah, man.
than live in Niceville, Valparaiso,
Like Destin
Keep
probably.
Choctaw
yeah.
Beach,
I mean,
Destin
yeah.
and Freeport. Yeah.
That's wild. That's so many people. Just
And we're not open 24/7.
No, we're not.
It's like
No,
everything's
things
closed at 8 o'clock here.
That's right. Interesting. Well, I know a lot of you fly through Atlanta Airport,
Yeah.
and so you first person to visit all 6 Starbucks and prove it wins a Boggy Talk mug. I will make one for you.
You haven't made one for me, though.
Is that my job now?
That is. So next week, we're going to, since we have Serve Day this.
Yes, Serve Day.
We had Survey this.
Yes, Serve
Wait,
Day's
wait.
coming up. It was. When's this
No,
coming out?
So this
Serve
is
Day.
This is coming out the Tuesday after
Yeah,
Serve Day.
so we
But-
had
we just
Serve
had
Day.
Serve Day for you guys
Yes.
listening.
Yes.
And we did the IMB thing.
Yes.
Right? And we're praying for.
Praying for the Jeffersons. Yes. And
Okay.
Laura Jones Moyingo's going to be here on the 15th. We're going to be talking about
Awesome.
our upcoming mission trips soon.
Yes. So next week we want to talk a little more about like why we are trying to do so much mission stuff, why the church needs to prioritize that, the tension of meeting needs and missions and all that stuff. I know we've talked about like helping, hurting, all this stuff, but just kind of really walk through that stuff. And then we've got some other really cool ideas, some special guests coming up in the next few weeks. We're not going to tell you who because they haven't confirmed yet, but we're
waiting.
Yeah. So, and then we got the Pastors Conference coming up. We'll talk about that. So we got a lot of cool things to talk about on Boggy Talk.
Absolutely.
I said all that because that game was super boring and I'm trying to redeem.
Just hype it it up a little bit
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
So, hey, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.